Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm so delighted to be speaking today about this project that we've had in the university library over the past few years. So I'm with my colleagues Amélie Deblauwe and Błażej Mikuła, who work as photographers in the Cultural Heritage Imaging Laboratory. And as for myself, I work in collections and academic liaison, and I'm the French specialist in charge of French collections in the university library. So we're going to talk to you about this exciting project that is at the moment receiving lots of news attention and how it came about. So it was a rediscovery in December 2019 by my colleague Sian Collins, so in the Archives and Modern Manuscripts department. She was recataloguing and rehousing papers from the manorial and estate records of the Van Eycks of Evningham, an aristocratic family that purchased the Evningham Hall in the 18th century and had previous records from different manors, including Huntingfield Manor. And so what happened is that while Sian was recataloguing the collection, she realized that in one of the boxes of the material, the binding of the archival manuscript was actually a medieval manuscript, a fragment of a medieval manuscript, and that what was called the story of Sir Gawain had not been fully identified. So we started an investigation to identify what was actually this old French text. And it turned out to be the Vulgate sequel of Merlin. And it's a really small world because it turns out it's the text I had done my PhD on about 10 years before. So COVID happened and it delayed us somehow. But we assembled a project team and received funding in 2023 from Cambridge Digital Humanities. And it was truly an interdisciplinary team with colleagues from Archives and Modern Manuscripts, Conservation and Heritage, obviously the Cultural Heritage Imaging Laboratory, and the French collections. So we applied with a project which aimed to create digital resources supporting digital humanities research. And we wanted to use this small grant to carry on advanced digitization and analysis of this fragment. This was particularly challenging, and so here you can see so our manuscript reused as a binding was part of a much larger collections where you have archives preserved in different forms. It can be scrolls or codices. And here you have an example, so also related to this Huntingfield Manor that I was talking about, where, as you can see, a piece of parchment is used to cover the archival material, to wrap around and protect it. But what you have in front of you is actually a blank parchment, whereas what was interesting in our case is the reuse of a medieval manuscript, a medieval fragment. As you can see, it is folded several times, so there are turn-in flaps. So all this so reinforces the binding, but make things difficult when you want to access the text. And so part of our project was to make the fragment more accessible and actually readable, while its handling is very problematic. It's quite a fragile object overall, especially when you want to go under the folds and read the text that is hidden underneath. And so we wanted to keep this fragment intact because it is also interesting historical evidence of archival binding practices in the 16th century when it was reused as a cover. And of course, we didn't want to disband the fragment, to separate the manuscript binding and the core archival block, something that might have been done 20 or 30 years ago in libraries across the world. But how to do that? We decided to use imaging methods and quite advanced ones and something which hopefully will be also methodologically useful for other projects and people working with fragments. So in terms of accessing the text, indeed, it was really hard to really go under the folds. There were several folded parts, multiple times. Of course, so the binding is sewn to the core archival text block. There is also a stitch which prevents the opening up of what you can see on the image on the top right corner. All this making access to this fragile evidence quite challenging. And indeed, so I guess the interest is twofold. It's both the medieval text, the story of Merlin itself, and how to access it, but also what were scribes in the 16th century doing in terms of preserving and binding the material that they were writing. So here I'm going to show so with what my colleague Błażej did. Go ahead, Błażej. So this is actually the end product in a way, or one of the end products of the project.
Yes. So here's the kind of like end result of making the unfolding of the Merlin manuscript. You can see, for me to make this one, I needed first 2 images, so front and back. We can unfold it again. So front and back, and then once I got this one, I could use a commonly known software called Blender to put it together. In general, the idea seems simple, but once I was trying to unfold this one on the Blender, I came out across a lot of different issues. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Blender. It's a beautiful free software to create 3D models. You can do almost anything on this one. And I tried, because I tried first to build Merlin manuscript from the scratch. And that was lots of different issues. But luckily, after a short run, I came out with a quick idea, a solution, very simple ideas are the best one. To use transparencies. So basically on Blender, I could use a PNG file with a transparency. And because of that, you can see that basically you can see all the edges of the manuscript, and they are not cut out. They're literally just a rectangular with transparency. It's a simple idea, but it took me a while to come out with this one. I'm very proud of it. To make animation in Blender, you need to create a little structure of bones. So I had to create some bones, and then with key points, I could fairly quickly, in a simple way, animate it. Another thing which is great for Blender lovers, I had to render this one in the Cycle engine. It's kind of like a ray tracing engine for gamers. But we also wanted to have a proper 3D scan of the Merlin manuscript. So at the library, in general, we have books. And books are pretty much three-dimensional, but pages itself kind of too. And Amélie and I, in our digital, in our imaging, in our studio, photographic studio, we specializing in photographing pages, because we just go through the book. Later on, we are uploading this one on digital library. So in general, like a 2D. But the library is full of sort of different treasures, and we have also very, very interesting objects. So over the time, we worked out this workflow of photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is another brilliant idea. Very simple thing. All you need is literally just a camera, lots of images of an object, and the software will do magic. But we are also very lucky at the library because we could get an extra equipment. This iron or steaming machine. It's an Artex scanner. It's extremely good machine. We call this one, it's like a photogrammetry on steroids. It takes hundreds of images very, very quickly, and almost in real life, you can see some results on a screen, so you exactly know where you are. This really kind of, it's a life-changing thing when it comes to photogrammetry. Anybody who was doing photogrammetry knows you're taking a lot of pictures, you're processing that for 5 hours, and then you have to start again because things didn't work out. With this one, you more or less know where you are, you save your time. But the first time that the manuscript came to our studio, it was before conservation. And we decided, let's scan this manuscript before conservation and after to have some sort of comparison. Before conservation, after conservation, we are crumbled a little bit this, we make it a bit more flattened, and relax some folds. You can see some of those things around. It's much more visible on the photographs. Which takes me to another step, photography. Again, we started with before conservation and after conservation. You can even see here on a corner, it's more folded. And in here, it was much easier to stretch it. And also, it's a great comparison to know, where you are with this. To capture those images, the main cameras we're using in our studio are phase 1 cameras. They have digital bags of 100 or 150 million pixels. They're beautiful cameras. They generate massive, big pictures, a lot of megabytes. And we're very proud of them. But the main problem, not the problem, but challenge with the folded Merlin was to get into all those little foldouts. How to do that? We could not use our phase 1s with a big lenses just to get there. So we need to use some other stuff. And again, we're very lucky. We have some stuff. We have these problems. It's, as you can see, it's very long, very narrow, and it can get into places. It also has a light source at the end, which is very useful, and we used it a lot. We tried some other techniques as well. We tried this little device, this endoscope. Didn't work out that well. I mean, the image quality was really bad, and at the end, we didn't get any much closer than with the problems. We used wide-angle lenses as well, mirrors, but I'll come to that later. And we also use smartphone. Smartphone in general would work well, but again, on this occasion, when we are placing smartphone next to a manuscript, we had to get very close, and the smartphone couldn't focus. Maybe some different mobile phones would manage, but the one that we could use in our studio, it didn't work well. Okay. So, to photograph this manuscript, Merlin, we had to use a little help, mainly our conservation. They are next to us in the same building, very, very close. Every time we need them, they are very helpful. So we used, to hold this manuscript, we used some magnets. We had to create little triangles. They don't look much, but the thing is that they all had to be very, very soft and not rigid, because the biggest problem with this manuscript was the fragility of the object. Because every time I was getting with the lens, there was this possibility, if we go too far, we'll just snap it and we'll damage. Mainly, we used hands. So here's Sally, she's holding the manuscript. Here's me with a little ring light trying to take a picture. And we did a lot of pictures. Here we are. Some pictures inside of the foldouts. The thing that you can notice here, for example, on this one, a part of the photograph is sharp, another one is not really. I mean, ideally, everything would be sharp, so we can use this one to create all this picture. And there are some techniques, and we use them as well. In a simple way, we used something which is called focus stacking. Focus stacking, it's you take a lot of pictures with focus just going a little bit forward. And then, again, digital and computers generate this image that is sharp across. This is the biggest problem when you do macro photography. If you've seen photographs of little bugs, stuff like that, if they're all sharp, if those beautiful sharp images, this being focus stacked. Sometimes they use like thousands of images because of this small object. We didn't have to do thousands, we did hundreds. In here, this image is one of those probe lenses, the one with the long tube. That's how you're getting this little light. As you can see, not everything is sharp, it's very distorted, but you're getting somewhere. And this part, for example, this is one of the issues. This is what we were looking after. So this is what we tried not to damage. And we managed, so everything was fine. In the middle, just a simple mirror. A lot of simple techniques here, but in the end, very, very good results. Magnets, some triangles, mirror, and some hard work.
I had the privilege to be involved in the project for another aspect of using yet another technique that we are able to do in our department, and that is multispectral imaging. It is a non-destructive technique again, so we're still, really looking after this document and really caring first and foremost for its safety. And multispectral imaging is a pretty advanced imaging technique, which will create sets of images of the same object, but captured under many different lights. So as we mentioned traditional photography just a second ago. So we use normal, 2 flashlights, which we take one picture under the same light conditions every time, and we move the object or whatever. Here it's different. We use various wavelengths of light, which range from the infrared here and through the visible spectrum of light and into the ultraviolet. This is captured by our astronomy camera, and let me show you a little bit what it looks like in the room. So our camera is here, and it's a very sensitive digital camera. Like I said, it's used in astronomy originally, so it captures the smallest amount of light. Just under it is we have a little box that contains 2 wheels of filters. I'll tell you in a minute what they do. And these light spectrums that I was just mentioning are emitted from these LED panels that you see on top here or on here. So really our setup will have the camera on a column in the middle and 2 LED panels, main LED panels on either side of the item. This is a close-up of one of these LED panels, and they are the ones emitting these lights ranging through the whole spectrum. On the side, we also have 2 arms of raking light shining here from the side of the page at a lower angle. I'll tell you more in a second. And our object will be placed here on a cradle. Here you see it like a setup for a bound item. It was a little bit more complicated with our Merlin, but more on that in a second. That's to give you an idea of what it looks like. We're in the room. We're in a dark room, no windows. When we're imaging, we turn all the lights off, and it's only the light that's emitted from these very controlled conditions that will be captured by the camera. The system, when we run the full imaging sequence, will provide us with 49 different images of one page or one item. All right, so it's an incredible amount of data that is produced from this multispectral setup. And there are 4 more components to the sequence of images that we will be collecting from this. The main one being, or the first one rather, would be the reflectance one. And these images are to, illustrate that we will go from throughout the whole spectrum, again, 19 wavelengths from infrared all the way into UV, just shining onto the page and illuminating the item from these LED light panels. The photons emitted from these lights, this light will interact with the materials such as the ink, the parchment, the pigments, and all of these materials will absorb a certain amount of it and reflect back out various amounts of it, and the camera will capture that. So that's our first 19 images. Our following 18, it's 18 plus 4, so it's 22 images, because it's in 2 little sequences, but they use the same principle, which is we will measure the fluorescence of the manuscript. And that will be done by shining only in the blues and in the UV light at the page. So we will shine these lights repeatedly while filtering them. And you remember I pointed out this little box that contains filter wheels, and we will filter them various combinations, blocking the UV, blocking this or that. And we're trying to see how the materials react differently. It's particularly helpful when we are trying to recover writing in, for example, iron gall ink or plant-based inks. on parchment or paper because they react differently to this. They fluoresce differently. They glow differently than the support, than the parchment or the paper. It may be very useful for recovering faded text or text that has been lost. For example, if iron and gold ink has almost completely disappeared because it lifts and it falls off from the page or it destroys the page, but we can see where it's lighter, it's left a little imprint, if you like, in the page, and that will be visible. And so that's our first 19 and 22 images. And then we move on to raking light, where we have these arms here. And like the name says, it is raking light because it's at a low angle from the page. So it's much lower on the stand than the light panel. It hits the page at an angle between 9 and 15 degrees. And it will really reveal, it will cast shadows rather on all the little imperfections and all the relief of the page, the texture really, and it will make it visible. Imagine, I always say it's a little bit like at sunset or sunrise, your shadow is really long because the sun is low on the horizon. And here it's the same thing. We have the light coming from a low angle and therefore making all the surface variation much more visible. It can be used in some cases also to identify the ruling marks or other groove marks made by writing instrument, or even erasure marks as well. Sometimes the parchment has been scraped with an instrument. We can identify, we've been working on this recently, not on Merlin, but on other material. You can identify whether it's been done by a blunt tool or a very small sharp tool, and we see all these distinctions with this imaging. And finally, and that will be the four last images of our 49 image sequence. And that's, you're about, at this point, you're like 6.5 minutes in, so you're in there for a while. It's transmitted light. Our object is placed on the cradle, as I mentioned, and the light sheet is inserted either between the page, if it's a bound material, or just under the fragment, like we did for our Merlin, although it was also between the fragment and the text block. And 4 different wavelengths of light are emitted and shining through the page. And again, that's what our camera will capture. I mentioned logistical challenges, and indeed our fragment was very wide, bigger than perhaps your sort of average A4 size of a lot of manuscripts that we usually deal with. So we had to, make sure that it would stand level and safe. So we use various props and foam blocks and others to hold it in place. Of course, my colleagues have mentioned the stitches and the flaps and the turn-ins already. All this had to be accommodated. And of course, I mentioned the raking light. So if you have protruding bits of the manuscript, it will cast a big shadow. So we try to keep it as flat as possible by using a metal sheet and magnets themselves covered in a protective material. So again, taking every possible measure to keep the manuscript safe. Now to talk a little bit about the results that we get from all this, from this multispectral imaging, or MSI as we call it. You can see here, so that's a composite false color image. That it means that it's more like a normal image. We've used the visible light images from the multispectral to recreate this. And you can see, and actually this was a very particularly interesting sort of revelation while we were working on it. We noticed with my colleague, former colleague of conservation, Jennifer Murray, we realized, there was a slightly faded part of the text here. And it was particularly visible in the multispectral, as you'll see in a second. And that's when we thought that perhaps it shows and reveals that the manuscript might have been at some point wrapped with a leather strap or some kind of strapping to keep it together. But that's also resulted in some text being faded along that middle part. And so I used the word data before. When we captured all these images of multispectral, they are more than photographs. They are really, it's data that if you combine in certain ways or add some to another, you can extract information from it. And I mentioned also that different inks and different supports react differently to these different exposures. So you can, if you put two and two together, you can guess that by combining some images that will reveal more of one thing and less of the other, you can really highlight and enhance the readability of some things. Here you see various processes that we use in our post-processing softwares, such as independent component analysis or minimum noise fraction, or ICA MNF for the little nicknames. And these were applied to folio 1, trying to recover more of that rubbed off text. So this is still the middle of our page where the text was much less clear, and you can see that applying these different processes is allowing us to make it a lot more contrasted and far more readable for our, at least for our old French scholars. Interestingly, and I mentioned that we shoot 49 images, and we don't always know for sure or from the onset what will yield interesting results. And this is a little bit what I like to call the magic of processing multispectral imaging. You know, you sometimes have to keep trying and use different processes and combine different exposures to reveal information. We're back on our first folio here, but we're looking at detail from column A. And you can see here in the normal color image that there is a very faded inscription in the margin here, which was, it appears to be from a later addition to the manuscript. Running it through ICA here on the left really yielded very poor results, and actually, well, probably made it even worse, frankly. But another type of processing at the bottom here made it incredibly clear to read and confirmed that it was related to the later stage of this manuscript as used as part of a binding for the Huntingfield Manor estate. And I will pass the baton back to Irène.
Yes, so our project involved advanced imaging, as you can see, but some of this was really also about analysis of the fragment. And this was truly a collaborative project because we worked together with the colleagues in the imaging laboratory, but also across Cambridge with colleagues here at the Fitzwilliam Museum, as well as with colleagues in the zoology department, because there's this consortium across the University of Cambridge to purchase and then share, high-tech equipment that needs, special investment. And in this case, so we benefited from the equipment and expertise of our colleagues in the Fitzwilliam working on fiber optic reflectance spectroscopy, FORCE, which allows, thanks to projecting a ray of light on specific elements of the text or the decoration, to identify the pigments used in the manuscript. And so this allowed to reveal that there were three types of pigments used in our Merlin fragment. So 2 types of blue, azurite and indigo, as well as vermilion. And what's really innovative about our project, and it's a discovery we're really proud of, is that so we were able to match the results of this existing technique with what MSI imaging has produced for us, because we have matched the identification and the distinction of these 2 azurite and indigo pigments with some MSI imaging by the creation of a false color composite image. So it's a part of this post-processing of the MSI images that we've talked about. Because as you can see on the right, so that's the original manuscript, and you have 2 types of blue. The fine line on top and the pen flourishing inside the initial. The first one is azurite, the second is indigo. And thanks to MSI, now we're able to create an image that distinguishes visually through the blue color still for azurite. So I'm talking about the left hand side image here, the blue of the azurite, and what becomes the red or the pink of the original indigo blue. And this is something that we're really excited because that can potentially be applied, to other analysis of medieval fragments. Another technique that we also tried on our Merlin manuscript was infrared reflectography. Again, so with a camera that we borrowed from the Fitzwilliam colleagues. So this allowed us to identify the type of ink used in the fragment. So it was mainly plant-based ink, probably arengol, whereas there was really little carbon apart from some staining in the manuscript. And so I'm now going to pass on to my colleague Błażej to talk about the computer tomography.
CTI. Okay, so I think another important part in a project like this is having friends. Here's Maciej Pawlikowski, he's the head of our department, and he's very good in making friends. And thanks to that, we met Ketura Smithson from zoology department, and we could use a big one, CTI micro CT scan. So here we can see our Merlin waiting to be sliced by the X-ray machine. This Nikon, it was quite, it's a large machine. We don't have this one in the library, but luckily zoology has one, and they also have people with all the knowledge and skill. So what I'm gonna be saying right now, in general, this was all done by Ketura Smithson. So we scanned this one with this machine, and we just generated way more data. And once we have the data, we like to make another 3D model. So here's the 3D model of the manuscript of the Merlin, done with the micro CT scan. But what's incredible about this one is that we could distinguish the difference between the material. So later on, we're going to show you a piece of thread. But just quickly, here's a little video of how it looks like when you slice our Merlin. So right now you can see just animation, the image by image, slice by slice, just going up. You can see here little twiddle, this is thread. Little flashes here and there, it's going to be a bit of iron in the ink. And here's actually the Merlin. So this is the detachment. The thing inside is the thing that the Merlin is bound around. And you can see little swirls here, and this is little slice. So what you can see is literally everything of that Merlin. It's incredible. I love it.
So this is interesting because it also relates to the composition of the internal book block, so the archival material. So there are three main quires, parts, and it's probable that it's around quire 2, the central part, which itself is in 2 subsections, that the Merlin cover was attached initially with possibly later editions of quire 1 and 3. So the date range is wide, and we have the dates thanks to the property record. So this is between 1580 and 1610, so the reigns of Elizabeth I and James I. But it's possible that the Merlin was placed as a binding first, and that later bits were added later. So we could see some of the sewing of the binding externally by looking at the material, but you can see how hard it is to look at, to examine, to access. But what was amazing with the CT scan is that actually we were able to go into the sewing and the structure of the binding itself. So this is the some of the raw, already processed images, and these are the images with the fake coloring. And you can see that there are two types of threads used in the binding. So we have these long plaquettes, so these twirly bits, which is actually a parchment, which is reinforced by being twisted, and is used to bind to connect the binding with the second quire, the oldest and middle part of the archival material. And you have other types of threads used, but it's really interesting because you can see the loops made by the sewing. And again, there's probably more research to do through this model, which allows us literally to see inside what's invisible to the naked eye. Oh, sorry, I forgot to to do the animation. And then, so we'll go on to another bit of the project. So this is how we did the image stitching and the reconstruction of the fragment virtually. So creating a model, reconstructing Merlin.
Right. So far we have a bunch of 3D models. We have a CT scan. We pull out the thread out of the manuscript without destroying the manuscript. Incredible, I love it. And I have a lot of images that are waiting for me to put them together and to make this unfold. So after photographing manuscript with the problems, with mirrors, I had to put it together. To do that, I simply use our Photoshop, and it was a massive file, massive, very, very big image. I had to put them together. I did focus stacking. The images were distorted, so I had to undistort them, skew them, move them around. Then I need to align them in the right place. Thanks to Irène, we were doing that from time to time, just a phone call. I don't know where this is going. So Irène was coming and we were putting in the right place. So that took a while. And it was rewarding, but it was a long process. And of course, after a while, once I was thinking I'm getting somewhere, I realized I didn't get anywhere because I was missing images. So again, calling our conservator, Sally, his very overexposed image. Here's Sally holding the book, waiting for me to take a picture, and just taking more photographs. Because I realized, okay, we missed something, we need to go back to the manuscript, let's bring it, let's photograph. And this is what we're dealing with. You can see another here, this is that's where the book, hanging, a little thing, very easy to destroy an image. We were very lucky not to do that. You can also see some of those like very dark, so to actually get light into that little folders was very difficult. Hence we used quite often this LED ring light. And this is a bit of a process how it was going on. I started with the simple things. So those images taken with the phase 1 cameras, very easy. This is job done. But then getting here, okay, this will deal with it later. Okay, that's what I have. Okay, let's start to untwist that, take more pictures, find places where we're still missing, have a little discussion. And I'd love to say everything was captured and photographed and we can see it all. It's not true. We did manage, well, we didn't miss the spots. It was just impossible to get them. It was either the book or the pictures. So we decided not to destroy Merlin, keep it as it is. And we said, okay, we can live without this little piece here. Mystery is here. We don't know what's in there. Could be anything. Probably just, we probably don't know. So here we go. It took a bit of time, but we managed to put that together. I'm calling this a little bit like a Frankenstein because it is bits by bits together. And it looks nice, right? So
What did we learn also about the manuscript? So we had, a very broad-ranging project. We wanted to try out different techniques to make them yield, as much as possible. In terms of dating, I guess we're back to some of the basics. So we looked at the decoration, and our friends, historians of arts, are really specialists of the subject. So it's interesting because in our fragment, we have not only the pen-flourished initials, like the one below, but also these bigger partied or parti-colored letter with the blue and the red, together in the initial, which is a rarer way of decorating, I guess, Arthurian text of this kind, and elements in really the details, the style of these decorations help us date the manuscript between so the last third of the 13th century or last quarter and the beginning or the first quarter of the 14th century. And we're hoping to go even beyond this broad date range by a really close examination of the paleography. So that's the way the letters are written. The scribe has copied the text, but this is ongoing. Again, in terms of locating the manuscript, it was probably made in France, in northern France. And how do we infer that? It's because of the language used in the text. So it's Old French, but it has linguistic aspects of Picard, which is a dialect of northern France. And it's the linguistic analysis of the text that help us draw these conclusions. And again, this is something that I'm working on. So for the textual edition of the Merlin fragment. And really what happened is that, so we wanted to be able to read the text. So of course we've been using these high-tech images that were produced throughout the project, but of course without also a knowledge of the text and an understanding of the text, we wouldn't have been able to piece together this Frankenstein that Błażej was talking about. So it was really a back and forth between what the imaging can bring and what the real examination of the manuscript and the expertise regarding the text, allowed us to work with. So we started with a transcription of the text, and of course, so you've seen the virtual unfolding of the fragment, but what's really hard with working with digital images without this reconstruction is that you have images, upside down, underneath, in different directions, and it's really hard to navigate. Whereas in some respects, working with the actual real object, is easier. But then you have all these, nooks and crannies that also are a challenge. But it was really, I guess, a back and forth between the actual object and the imaging, which in the end allows to reduce manipulation and potential, harm to the manuscript. So to go back to the so the manuscript tradition of Merlin. So we have one fragment of the sequel of Merlin, and so there are 36 manuscripts of Merlin and its sequel. So we have one more fragment of a missing one. And so what is it? So we have a Merlin text, which was written at the beginning of the 13th century in Old French and in prose. But before that, there was, of course, an oral circulation of the Arthurian legends in the Celtic world. So that's the Welsh Merlin that probably, was the subject of oral legends and stories and songs. But it's in terms of written literature, a kind of literature that is first written in Latin. So you have Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century. So he's Welsh, of course, but he writes the prophecies of Merlin and the Vita Merlini. Then there's Old French, because after the Norman conquest, Anglo-Norman becomes the language of the nobility in Britain. And then you start to have these stories in Old French verse. So Wace, who kind of translates the Historia of Geoffrey of Monmouth. And then Chrétien de Troyes, who again writes Arthurian romances in Old French verse. And what happens in the 13th century, and that's when our text comes in, is that all these stories are rewritten in prose and are put together in this enormous compilation called the Lancelot Grail Cycle, which wants to unify all these stories and tell the story of the Grail from its origin, so the death of Christ and Joseph of Arimathea, up to the quest of the Grail and in the end the death of Arthur and the destruction of his kingdom. And it's only around that same time in the 13th century that we start having so English versions of the legend. So there's a famous Edinburgh manuscript. We have a verse translation of the French Merlin. But it's really in the 15th century that it really takes off, that English becomes the language through which these legends are read in England, with little known text, Lovelich, the history of the Holy Grail and Merlin, so again a translation of our French Merlin. A prose Merlin, we have a copy here in the university library, and the Lovelich Merlin is actually at Corpus Christi. And then Thomas Malory, who with his Morte d'Arthur, again based on the Lancelot Grail cycle, really becomes the way you access the Arthurian legend. And so it's not insignificant, because so we have our 13th century text, early 14th century manuscript, and at the end of the 16th century, it is discarded, dismembered, and reused as a cover. It's because at the time, I guess the people who were reading it thought it had become out of fashion. It wasn't interesting anymore. Maybe they couldn't read the Old French anymore. They were reading the English text. So it started to be outdated, and it was replaced by these new English texts. So that's why it was discarded and reused in our archive as a binding for our archival material. So what is it about? So this sequel to Merlin is about the early reign of King Arthur, helped by Merlin, his advisor and military commander, a prophet and a magician. So what do? They fight against the pagan Saxons, and they fight again against Arthur's rebelled barons. And so we have calculated that in our fragment, so it's a bifolio, you have the very first and the very last folio of a quire made of 12 folio. And this is a piece of the text that is really close to the end of the manuscript. It was probably not the last quire, but the penultimate quire of the lost manuscript. And what is really lucky and interesting in this Cambridge fragment is that, so on the one hand, you have the defeat of the Saxons at Cambenic, a description of the prowess of Gawain and his supernatural powers. And in the second part, slightly different text, because this time it's Arthur's court and Merlin coming as a harpist, coming to Arthur's court. So we don't have illuminations in our manuscript, but there is an important tradition for these manuscripts, which were intended for a noble audience, which are often kind of luxurious manuscripts. And so here you can see the different parts of the text. So so King Lot, so he's the father of Gawain, goes onto the battle. And so our fragment, if we look at the textual tradition, is interesting because so it's one of less than 40, but each one of these fragments is interesting because it tells us something about the history of the text, its manuscript circulation and transmission. So based on the text that we have in our fragment, it seems that our fragment belongs to the short version, because there are a long and a short version of the Vulgate sequel. Because of the description of Gawain. Gawain, who, when it's midday, is at the peak of his strength with his supernatural powers and is able to defeat his enemies. So on his horse Gringalet with Excalibur, the sword that Arthur gave him. Indeed, battle scenes were a key element and of key interest also for the audience of these texts. In the second part, it's slightly different. So we have Merlin coming to Arthur's court as a harpist, and we have a passage of transition in the fragment, which shows how difficult actually the study of the textual transmission of the text is, because whereas the first fragment seems to indicate that we have a Merlin Merlin sequel belonging to the short version of the text, actually in this piece of transition, the passage is actually closer to the long version of the text. Stories are, quite complicated. So what happens? So Arthur gathers his court at Camelot for the Feast of the Assumption. There's gift giving by Guinevere and Arthur, a religious service, a banquet. And so Merlin comes as a harpist. And here again, to go back to the textual tradition, although we are in the short version of the text, it seems that the writer of the short version, even if he abridged the long version in general, here he was really interested in what happened to Merlin as a harpist and his description, this beautifully clothed man, blind, who comes to play for Arthur's court. And so the short version is actually longer textually than the long version. So we have, so illuminated manuscript, we show Merlin with his dog. So it's a mark of supernatural, the fact that he's, he's led by this white dog. And of course, there's the mythological figure of the blind storyteller. And then we have, both Arthur's court and the court of his arch enemy, the King Ryan, the Saxon, le roi Rion, who is going to challenge Arthur and to ask a tribute from Arthur, which is the beard, Arthur's beard. He's a giant Saxon, and there's again a kind of mythological resonance to that story. But of course, eventually, Rion is going to be defeated. So just to go back to the textual tradition, so I guess scholars, when they find a text, a new manuscript or fragment, they try to place it in the textual tradition, and some mistakes that have been made through the copy of the text and are often passed down from copy to copy, allow us to retrace the genealogy of this text, how they have been copied over time. And we had one of these clues in our text. It's the fact that we have this character Dorylas who appears. He's a Saxon, and it's actually a mistake which appears in some texts of the short version of the Merlin sequel. You can see in these two columns of text, on one hand you have Dorylas, and on the other hand you have Dodalis, and in fact it should have been Dodalis in both cases. So I'm not going to go into detail because it's quite complicated, but thank you very much for attending our talk. We're delighted to share this with you. And of course, you might have seen some of the news story that have come out, but the Merlin images are also available on the digital library, among other things. Thank you very much.